Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear it. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, make sure you like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves mysteries as much as you do. The night the Gardner Museum was robbed, Boston felt unnaturally silent. The kind of silence that sits above a city like a held breath. March 18, 1990, a cold night laced with a thin layer of fog that clung to the cobblestones and drifted like a ghost through the narrow streets of the Fenway neighborhood. Few people were awake at 1:20 a.m., which made the approaching headlights of a slow-moving car stand out all the more. Inside the museum, security guard Rick Abbott leaned back in his chair in the dimly lit control room. The monitors flickered in a bluish haze, showing empty galleries filled with centuries of art. Paintings worth millions hung quietly in the dark, their gold frames catching the faint ambient glow. The museum had the stillness of a sacred place, calm, preserved, untouchable. Or so everyone believed. On the monitor showing the front entrance, Rick suddenly noticed flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the brick wall outside. A police cruiser rolled to a stop. Two officers stepped out, appearing stressed, urgent. Rick blinked, confused. Routine patrol cars didn't stop here. And they didn't usually approach with that level of determination. The intercom buzzed. A firm voice called out, "Boston Police. We're responding to a disturbance call. Open up." Rick hesitated. They weren't expecting anyone. But protocol was protocol, and the men outside looked official. He buzzed them in. The heavy security door clicked open, and the two uniformed figures entered. Their boots echoed in the marble lobby. They asked Rick to step away from the desk, claiming they needed to verify an ID. Moments later, Rick found himself being escorted into a back hallway. Something about their movements, too quick, too coordinated, triggered the first spark of suspicion. Before Rick could speak, the taller officer turned and said calmly, "This is a robbery." It was the moment that changed everything. Inside the main galleries, priceless works by masters, Vermeer, Rembrandt, Degas, hung in perfect silence. The museum was built like an Italian palazzo, with twisting hallways, ornate archways, and grand chambers filled with art collected over decades. None of the night staff knew that in a matter of minutes, some of these masterpieces would vanish, not into flames or chaos, but into the hands of thieves who would move with precision and eerie calm. At 1:48 a.m., the fake officers radioed someone outside. A second car pulled into the rear alley, its engine humming softly. The museum, with all its alarms, cameras, and heavy doors, was about to be undone by a single flaw: trust. As the thieves moved through the galleries, their flashlights cut across varnished surfaces and gilded frames. They avoided the motion detectors with practiced care. One paused before a painting, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the only seascape he ever painted. Its swirling waves seemed frozen midstorm, unaware of the real one unfolding before it. One of the thieves leaned in, studying it, then removed it with a swift, deliberate motion. For the next hour, the men worked quietly, methodically. They didn't run. They didn't panic. They acted as if they had complete assurance that no one was coming. When the sun rose over Boston, the Gardner Museum appeared undisturbed from the outside. A beautiful, historic building still wrapped in morning shadows, its secret devastation still hidden within its elegant walls. It wasn't until 6:45 a.m. that the day security staff arrived and realized something was wrong. For one, the front doors were slightly ajar. And inside, the museum felt colder than usual. Too quiet, even for early morning. "Rick," one guard called out. No answer. They searched the first floor. Nothing. Then the second. Still nothing. Finally, in the underground security office, normally locked, they heard a muffled sound. They forced the door open and found both night guards restrained but unharmed, startled but alive. "We were robbed," Rick said, his voice shaking. "They said they were police. But they weren't. They weren't at all." Boston police arrived within minutes. Federal agents followed. Soon, every hallway filled with investigators, walking slowly, examining frames, taking notes, whispering in tight clusters. The empty frames were the most surreal sight. Some hung crooked, others sprawled on the floor. Nails bent, fragments of canvas still clinging to the edges. What had once been some of the most valuable artworks in the world were now nothing but outlines on faded wallpaper. The head of the FBI's Art Crime Unit, Special Agent Samuel Whitmore, arrived shortly after 10 a.m. He was tall, sharp-eyed, with a calm demeanor that belied the storm unraveling in his mind. As he walked the galleries, his gaze followed the thieves' path, step by step. "They knew exactly what they were doing," he murmured. "They knew the layout. They knew the schedule. And they knew what to take." But as he surveyed the damage, one detail struck him as strange, something small but nagging. The thieves hadn't taken the most valuable pieces. They had taken pieces that didn't make sense. Paintings worth tens of millions left untouched. Rare artifacts barely glanced at. It was as if someone had given them a list, and not a list based on monetary value. As Whitmore leaned in to examine a broken frame, he noticed something else. Near the corner of the room, hidden behind a velvet rope, was a tiny scrap of material stuck under the molding. Not canvas. Not paint. Something else entirely. He called an evidence tech over. "Bag this," Whitmore said quietly. The tech lifted the scrap with tweezers, carefully placing it into an envelope. It was the first clue. A small one, but a clue. Whitmore stared at the empty space where the missing Rembrandt had hung. Whatever this scrap belonged to, he muttered, it wasn't from anything that was taken. Then he straightened up. Which meant the thieves weren't alone. Someone else had been inside the museum that night. And the clue they left behind meant everything. But when the FBI later opened the evidence envelope and examined the scrap under magnification, what they discovered changed the direction of the investigation entirely. The morning after the heist, Boston woke under a sky that felt colder than usual, painted in a sharp pre-dawn blue. News anchors repeated the same lines on every channel, no alarms triggered. No suspects identified. No footage recovered. It was the kind of crime that made people whisper in grocery lines and double-check their locked doors. And inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the silence felt heavier than the stolen frames that now hung empty. Special Agent Lena Hart arrived before the sun fully climbed over the Charles River. She walked into the museum's Dutch room slowly, her eyes scanning the empty gilded frames, once home to masterpieces by Rembrandt and Vermeer. Their absence felt like a wound. Each missing piece represented not only priceless cultural history but an attacker who had slipped through the cracks like smoke. Museum security lead Thomas Avery stood nearby, running a shaky hand over his jaw. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept. 15 pieces, he whispered. It's not possible. You'd need a truck. And time. A lot of time. Lena motioned toward the untouched motion sensors along the wall. Except they didn't trip a single one. She knelt to examine the cut canvas edges, precise, steady, professional. This wasn't rushed. Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut. Detective Michael Jarrett from Boston PD joined her, flipping open his notebook. We pulled the overnight call log. 0 disturbances. 0 alerts. Even the neighboring streets were quiet. Lena's jaw tightened. So they walked in, took what they wanted, and walked out. In a major U.S. city. Without a single camera or witness. Michael nodded grimly. Yeah. Like ghosts. But ghosts didn't cut phone lines. They didn't impersonate cops. They didn't know the museum's emergency protocols better than the staff who worked there. Lena stepped back and looked at the room in its entirety. Someone planned this. Someone practiced this. Someone had help. She wasn't wrong. The first crack in the story. By noon, the FBI command center had taken over the museum's conference hall. Maps, grainy hallway stills, and forensic photos covered the walls. Analysts replayed timestamps from the museum's few surviving internal logs, trying to map anyone's movement. Even without working cameras, the system recorded electronic activity, doors accessed, sensors bypassed, alarms disarmed. One detail stood out immediately. At 1:24 a.m., the side service door was opened for exactly 8 seconds. No guard admitted to touching it. Michael circled the timestamp on the printout and slid it toward Lena. That's our entry point. Maybe, Lena replied. Or maybe it's our distraction. She was right to hesitate. Too many things were too coordinated. The two disguised men, whoever they were, had led the guards downstairs, handcuffed them, taped them, and moved through the museum freely. Yet they didn't steal everything of value. Entire wings were untouched. They took only specific pieces, works that collectors had hunted for decades, paintings that could disappear into private vaults forever. Art goes missing all the time, Michael muttered. But this is something else. Lena rubbed her temples. This isn't theft. This is an order. The interview. The guards, Rick and Jonathan, were brought in for questioning that afternoon. Rick trembled slightly, his eyes red from the long night. Jonathan looked almost numb, staring down at the table as if afraid to look up. Lena started gently. You're not in trouble. But we need your help. Rick exhaled shakily. They knew our names, he said. That's what scared me most. They walked in like they'd been here before. Like they rehearsed this. Jonathan nodded. One of them, he kept looking at the Raphael. He said it was the real prize. But they didn't take it. Michael leaned forward. Why not? I don't know, Jonathan whispered. He hesitated. Then the other one said, we don't have clearance for that one. Clearance. The word lingered in the room like a warning. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine. Criminals didn't talk like that. Not amateurs, not random thieves. Clearance sounded like chain-of-command language, something used in organized networks, or even systems with military precision. Did they sound local? She asked. Rick shook his head. No. Their voices were weird. Not accents, just controlled. Like they were afraid of slipping. Jonathan finally looked up. They weren't just robbers. They were trained. Lena leaned back in her chair. Every answer only deepened the mystery. Rick wiped his forehead. And there was something else. Something strange. Lena waited patiently. Go on. One of them had a small device strapped under his jacket. Black. Almost flat. He kept checking it, like it was giving instructions. Michael frowned. A communication device? Maybe. But I didn't recognize it, Rick said. I've never seen anything like it. Lena's pen paused over her notes. This was becoming more than a local heist. An unlikely lead. By early evening, the investigation hit its first breakthrough. A forensic tech rushed into the command center holding a printed still image, one manually recovered from damaged CCTV after hours of digital cleaning. It showed a blurred figure in the alley behind the museum at 1:30 a.m. The silhouette was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing something that looked like a heavy coat. The figure wasn't entering or exiting the museum, instead, they stood perfectly still, watching the building from across the street. Lena studied the image closely. The figure's face was impossible to see, but there was something on their wrist, a glint of metal, catching the faint blue of the streetlight. Not a watch. A bracelet. And not just any bracelet. A very specific one. She recognized the pattern immediately. It matched the kind given to former members of the Belhust Syndicate, an old European art trafficking network believed to be disbanded years ago. Some members had been arrested. Some had disappeared. Some were rumored dead. But one name stood above all. Silas Vane. A ghost in the art world. A man who had never been photographed clearly, never been arrested, never left evidence behind. A legend whispered among curators and investigators alike. Lena felt her stomach twist. Michael, she said quietly. This isn't just a heist. He glanced at her. Then what is it? Lena placed the photo on the table. A declaration. The cliffhanger. As the team gathered around the recovered still, another tech ran into the room, breathless. We found something in the basement, he said, struggling to catch his breath. You need to see this. Lena and Michael exchanged a quick look before following him down the stairwell, past the archival storage rooms and maintenance corridors. At the far end of a long hallway, the tech unlocked a utility door. Inside, under a single flickering light, sat a narrow metal locker. It shouldn't have been there. It didn't belong to the museum. And taped across the front was a single strip of blue painter's tape. 3 words were written in clean, deliberate handwriting. For the FBI only. Lena swallowed hard, pushed the door open. And what they found inside changed the direction of the investigation completely. Detective Harris had already reviewed the security footage dozens of times, but something still felt off. The timeline was too clean. Too convenient. Too perfectly arranged. So he began re-interviewing people, starting with the one person who had avoided speaking early on. The neighbor, Daniel Cole. Daniel lived directly across from the victim's apartment. He was quiet, polite, and had been the first to call 911. At first, he seemed cooperative, even helpful. But during the second interview, small inconsistencies began to surface. He mentioned hearing a loud thud around 11:45 p.m., yet earlier, he claimed he hadn't heard anything unusual all night. When Harris gently pointed this out, Daniel brushed it off, saying he must have remembered wrong. But his nervousness wasn't what caught the detective's attention. It was the way Daniel reacted when Harris mentioned the blurry figure seen on the building's staircase camera, a figure wearing a hooded jacket, entering at 11:42 p.m. and leaving at 12:03 a.m. Most people usually leaned in, curious, wanting to see the footage. But Daniel didn't. Instead, he tensed. His jaw tightened. His eyes shifted away from the laptop screen. Detective Harris made a note. Then Daniel said something unexpected. Maybe whoever did it was already inside? No one outside the investigation team knew the police suspected that possibility. Not yet. Harris pressed him subtly. No accusation. No confrontation. Just quiet, careful questions. Daniel's answers grew shorter. His breathing became shallow. And by the end of the interview, the detective had confirmed one thing. Daniel knew more than he was willing to say. That single realization changed the direction of the entire case. And it was the moment when the investigation finally broke open.